Hey everyone, and welcome back to part 3 of the Dead by Daylight Iceberg. Today we're looking at the final 4 tiers of the iceberg. This is the deepest part of the iceberg too, meaning we're getting into the really deep and dark theories and facts and details and various things about Dead by Daylight. To start off today, we have Kate's old scream, and this is simply referring to Kate's original voice or scream she had, which was very, very loud. And it was a lot louder than you might think when I say very loud. It was sort of ear-piercingly loud. So this was changed around. I think it was on the PTB, but also an early live release of the game too, where Kate had a slightly different voice and scream. PTB Voices is an entry to follow this up, and this simply refers to the fact that in the PTB there's often a different placeholder voice for a character before the character actually releases. For example, when Felix came to the PTB, in the Descend Beyond chapter PTB, he had Steve's voice, I believe it was. It's really quite odd. And then later in the live release, he got his own voice, of course. BaseKit Unbreakable refers to a test that the devs did where they gave everyone BaseKit Unbreakable. This was tested as sort of an anti-slug measure. And it was done on the PTB, but it was never really touched on again and revisited. Despite this, it was really quite an odd thing that happened there. Essentially though, much like BaseKit Borrowed Time, BaseKit Unbreakable was a similar thing, but instead of for anti-camp, it was for anti-slug. Macmillan Water Tower refers to the strange transformation of the Macmillan Estate's water tower over the years. You may have noticed over time that a growth has been forming on the Macmillan Estate's water tower. This has slowly expanded over time and actually burst open a couple years ago and has this strange blue light and substance coming out of it. Interestingly, this is related to the Observer's storyline. If you didn't know, the Observer actually left his tower, he ventured out, and he went through a few of the realms, and he actually opened up this growth, and we found out it's a pathway to the Void, the place where lots of people are thrown and left for dead. So this was actually the Observer's doing. However, even after he left, this thing is still here and still present, which is quite odd. Meg in RE8, or Resident Evil 8, is a reference to a small Easter egg in RE8. Upon entering the Dimitrescu household for the first time, and the big castle part of it, you'll hear a scream cry out. And this is actually Meg's scream from the opening cinematic when you first launch Dead by Daylight. So there's a little Easter egg referring to Meg there. Maybe it could even be an alternate universe version of Meg who got captured by Lady Dimitrescu. Blight is Vigo. This was actually a popular theory upon Blight first being announced and him being called or dubbed the Alchemist early on. People actually thought this was Vigo, the lost lore character, who appears in very small ways around the game. This character with knowledge, seemingly, of the realm itself. And someone who is also referenced on the Blighted cosmetics, interestingly, which would suggest he possibly is related to the Blight, and so people think Blight is Vigo. After all, Blight doesn't remember much of his prior life, and he looks quite inhuman by his appearance. It is quite plausible that during his time in the realm, coming in as Talbot, becoming Vigo, and then later becoming the Blight, once he completely lost his mind and destroyed his body, is quite plausible actually. He even has a Vigo's Journal add-on. Project T refers to a DBD spin-off game that actually got cancelled. This only got cancelled I think last year in 2024, and it was set to be an open world game, I believe, in the wider realms of Dead by Daylight. If you didn't know, the realm of the entity is actually much wider and broader than what we see in game. In game, we just see the trials part of the realm, but there's much more to be explored in the wider realm. There are entire universes and worlds that the entity has consumed and destroyed. There are probably millions, potentially even billions of people within it, so it would have been a lot to explore. IRL DBD Ghostface outfits refers to the fact that Ghostface's masks in-game can actually be bought in real life if you go over to the Funworld store. Funworld are the license holders of the Ghostface mask, and they're actually very supportive, it seems, of DBD and DBD's Ghostface creation, which is part original, part license. Therefore, there's actually a number of DBD masks on their store. For example, I think the melted Ghostface mask is on there. I think the anniversary mask is on there. There's lots of ones that DBD made originally, and that Funworld have turned into real masks. Nia is from the future is a very old theory that I fairly fondly remember because it's one of the only theories I remember hearing about very early on into when I started making videos. And this was to do with Nia and the fact she was from the future. And people thought this because of a specific outfit. I think it was her spray paint one. It's like a set. And in this set, there was an artwork accompanied with it, and in the corner of the artwork, it referenced a time in the future. Because the artwork was drawn as CCTV footage capturing Nia spray painting something, and in the corner of the footage was the timestamp of the video, and it said something like something in later 2021 or I think 2022. It was in the future, and this was really bizarre, and it made everyone think, oh, Nia isn't actually from 2016 like we originally thought, she was taken in 2021. Official body pillows simply refers to the fact that these exist. There are official body pillows. I believe they made them for Huntress. I think there was a Spirit one. I think a Trapper one too. There was a variety of killer body pillows. And hey, do with that information however you see fit. Meg is part of the Legion is one of my own theories I wanted to put on here, but partly because it's sort of representing a wider, more common theory about characters being other characters from different universes. In this case, it's that Meg and Susie are the same person. They have a few similar features, but really it's just to do with the whole idea of the multiverse and the fact that technically a character from one universe could actually be a different one from another, if that makes sense. So that's all this theory was that Meg was part of the Legion, or was Susie essentially. They just took two different paths that led them in different directions. Vittorio is the key. Vittorio is the key to escaping the realm, is what this is referring to. If you didn't know, there's a lot of mention in the lore and lots of exploration about how to escape the realm itself. And it often comes down to people using their own body to write different hints and secrets and things like that. It's something that a lore character, Saku, comes across. She takes the skin of these sort of fog creatures that have these transcriptions on them. These creatures did this, or these unknowns as they're called. These don't seem to be the unknown, but instead something called unknowns. They might be related, it's possible. But basically they wrote on their own skin so that when they die in the realm and they come back to life, as we see with the survivors, for example, in the trials, they would still have their markings on their body, so they wouldn't forget everything. They would be able to pick up where they left off. They wouldn't be reset each time. This is also seemingly why Vittorio has these markings. These markings he seemed to place onto himself too in some kind of observer's tower with a strange paint, which gives it this glow. So it's possible the markings on him actually hold great significance and could lead the survivors to eventually escaping the realm. Carl's fate is a sort of a multifaceted one. Carl the Cashier is a character that appears in multiple stories. He appears in the Ghostface's trailer as a sort of a store clerk of some kind, and he gets killed by Ghostface, and Ghostface tosses some money on him as he leaves. He also appears in Legion's lore, and he's a store cleaner of some kind. He catches the Legion sort of vandalizing and stealing from Joey's old workplace, and he gets killed for it and buried up Mount Ormond. So Carl is actually quite an important character, featuring in both of these characters' stories. He's also very unlucky, with a charm referencing the fact that it was his last day on the job or something like that, or he was covering for a co-worker, I think it was, on the day he was killed when going to the store the day the Legion killed him. Old Dead Dog and Eerie Lighting. If you didn't know, on Dead Dog Saloon, but also the Eerie of Crows, they both had much different lighting originally. It was a much sort of duskier look. Dead Dog's was a lot more blue, and Eerie's was sort of a darker, deeper orange. And these were changed from the PTB. I do like how they both looked. I think Eerie was probably improved. It was made a bit brighter, maybe a bit less spooky. And in the case of Dead Dog, the old Dead Dog looked very lovely with its blue. However, it maybe has a bit more of a horror feel to it now, with the duskier orange colours. Rainbow Room refers to a strange leak that happened, I think, in 2023, and this was to do with a Stranger Things Chapter 2. There was a Rainbow Room leaked. The Rainbow Room is a room featured in Stranger Things Season 4, and it's part of the Hawkins National Laboratory. And it's also the room Eleven stayed in for a long while. Alongside the Rainbow Room, there was also supposedly going to be a Vecna killer added, not D&D Vecna of course, but Stranger Things Vecna, as well as some potential new survivors. And despite this Rainbow Room map actually being found in the files and being explorable by some leakers, it never ended up coming to the game, which is really bizarre. But it was there, seemingly. It just never quite came to fruition. Rin's father caused Adam's train to crash. This is another quite old theory, but a really good one as well. It's one that links together both Rin, the spirit, and Adam, Francis. They're both connected by their chapter already, but they don't have a direct connection within their chapter, aside them both living in Japan. This theory goes that the job that Rin's father lost, that caused him to go into a spiral and get incredibly angry, was to do with trains in some way, because there's some mention of a manufacturing error or some kind of problem that someone needs to take the fall for, which ends up being Rin's father. The theory is that it's some sort of important train part or something that happened to be in one of Adam's trains and caused his train to crash. So not only did Rin's father kill Rin and send her to the realm, but he's potentially even responsible for sending Adam too. And this could also be a grand entity thing too, with the entity whispering to Rin's father. So potentially it was all the entity's doing, causing both this train crash, but also Rin to eventually end up in the realm too. Huntress Ghostface simply refers to a fairly famous hacker, I think it was, who appeared in a bunch of games. And it was a Ghostface that would fly around and fling lots of hatchets at people. So I think Huntress Ghostface was sort of what they were dubbed. Ghostface's flip phone. This refers to what Ghostface had before his camera, which was actually a flip phone instead. Instead of pulling out his camera for the Mori, he would pull out a flip phone. This was changed, however. Concept art paintings refers to the various pieces of concept art that you can find around different maps or realms. For example, on Old Haddonfield, there used to be lots of concept art inside of the different houses. On current maps, such as Mother's Dwelling, you can find some concept art on the upper floors. SpongeBob reference. Interestingly, the game actually does reference SpongeBob, which is maybe a little strange, but it does. If you look at the flavor text for Plunderer's Instinct, I believe is the perk, it mentions something about the pioneers looting these babies for hours. And this is a reference to a SpongeBob episode and a quote he says about the pioneers, I think, riding these things for hours or something. It's a reference in some way. I sort of forget, but yep, there's a SpongeBob reference in the game. DBD Pinball refers to the fact that DBD Pinball exists as a game. It's under a game called Pinball M, and it's this sort of expansion, a DBD Pinball expansion. It's actually not too bad. I mean, it's pinball, so there's only sort of so much it can be, but it is pretty good for what it is. Bubba's lobby stance refers to how Bubba stands in the lobby. He has his sort of hammer slung over his shoulder and his chainsaw down by his side. Interestingly, this is actually a reference to a behind-the-scenes photo of Bubba on the set of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And in this photo, he's doing the exact same pose. So this pose in the lobby is actually a reference to a behind-the-scenes photo of Bubba, which I think is quite cool. Facility map. This map is an unused map for, I think it's the Haddonfield realm. There's a map in the game files called Facility or something like that, and it seems to be referencing the facility that Myers was kept in prior to escaping on Halloween night in 1978. And also quite likely the one we see in Halloween 2018, with there being sort of a big courtyard area in the center. So yeah, that's the facility map. It's actually playable to some degree. Again, I think I've seen videos on DBD leaks of people exploring it. It's largely just this untextured facility looking place though. It's nothing too flashy. It's this unused Haddonfield second map or part of the realm. Finger gun emote. This was simply an emote that was requested by the player base and got a lot of traction, and it was especially around the time of Ace's release due to him doing a finger gun pose a lot of the time in his core or key artwork. So lots of people wanted a finger gun emote of some kind, a bit like we have the point and the come here action. Aura nerf. This refers to a really strange nerf that went on around, I think, 2020, where the devs actually nerfed auras, which is something you may be questioning. How can you nerf the auras? Well, they did this by making them very sort of faint, but also sort of skeletal, if that makes sense. Instead of it being a complete blocky outline filled in with color, it was this strange sort of skeletal shape as instead around the frame of the character, and it was also much more faint or like pale in color. And this made it very difficult for a period of time to see auras. So back when barbecue was one of the stronger perks in the game and was used by almost everyone because of its BP gains, actually became very useless because you could barely make out the auras from a distance, because there'd be these really faint red auras, and so depending on the map it could be very hard to see. Just any map in general, in fact, it was quite difficult to see on. Pinhead clones refers to a very strange bug that went on where the clones of the Pinhead began to spawn in different places around various trials or realms whenever you played Pinhead. It happened on Midwich most notably, where on one of the Midwich staircases a Pinhead's head would appear popping out of the staircase floor, if that makes sense. There was also one that appeared under some stairs on the game, and there were a few other locations. You could see him completely in Larry's. It was this weird thing where Pinhead seemed to be getting duplicated. And the assumption for this is why this was happening was because when you teleport with Pinhead, you actually appear in a different location before you've physically seen it from your perspective. So you start teleporting, and the survivors can see you where you're going to teleport, but you're also still in the location you're teleporting from. This means there needs to be two sort of pinhead models at any given time. Therefore, this second pinhead was presumably, and presumably is still, on the map somewhere to appear in place of wherever you plan to teleport to. So it's like this body double that's required for the teleporting process and the sort of visual aspect of it. But it just bugged out in this instance, and they were appearing very strangely under the stairs and in locations they weren't meant to. Everyone will escape. Interestingly, this is something the devs have mentioned before, and it's that everyone will escape the realm at some point. I don't remember when they've said this. I feel like this is another one of those lost quotes of, them saying something and everyone can remember it, but no one can really confirm it necessarily. And this one basically just refers to that everyone, or the survivors specifically, I think, will eventually escape the entity's realm. And yeah, so that's quite positive. Just not for now, and probably not anytime soon. Hatchet item. I'm not too sure what this one refers to, actually. I think it's just referring to the fact that because there's hatchets in the lockers, people probably questioned why they weren't an item. It could also refer to a similar thing to before about how killers could drop their powers and pick them up. So possibly this could be done with Huntress. I think it's to do with the fact that people wanted the hatchets as an item. Oh, and true, it's also referring to the hatchet item that's referenced in the art book for the game, which was released alongside the game's launch. And in this art book, there's an item alongside the ones we have, like a flashlight, a toolbox, a medkit, keys and stuff like that. There's also a hatchet present there. So it suggests that at one point there was maybe plans for these survivors to actually wield the hatchets in the lockers or be able to fight back in some way, as there is a hatchet item sort of drawn out and referenced alongside these other ones. The true exit. I believe what I mean when I wrote this is the true exit out of the realm, and this appears to be in a very deep part of the entity's realm itself, and it's a part that the observer is searching for, and it's a part that a character like Saku seems to have found. It seems like Vigo may have found it too, and it's this very deep part of the realm. Saku finds it, and it's this huge sort of wall that she reads these different symbols into, or scratches symbols into, I think. And it opens up, and there's this sort of big void space that she eventually has to walk across this bridge and then sort of fall down this pathway. The other thing referenced is sort of opening part of the realm up to in some way. It's mentioned that you can do it with certain sounds, like with a gramophone, or with certain symbols. There's different ways, basically, that are suggested or referred to in the lore for how you could truly escape the realm and how it's possibly been done before. But none of them we've really seen happen firsthand, aside the Saku one, but I don't believe we've ever followed on from what's happened there yet, so we don't really know. The entity knows about behavior. This is just referring to the fact that the entity seems to be aware of behavior as developers of Dead by Daylight. It's sort of this strange crossover where, the entity knows about behavior created the entity. It's this crazy infinite loop. And this is basically because in the entity's realm, there's various newspapers around the realm titled Behavior Times, which would mean it knows about behavior, or behavior themselves are in the realm or part of it already. Giant survivors. This refers to the fact that, I think this simply refers to the fact that in the realm, the entity seems to change the sizes of survivors. So many of the survivors are much bigger than they're meant to be, if that makes sense, in the same way that some killers are sized up as well. Oh wait, and I've just seen the picture for this tier as well. This also refers to a bug where lots of the survivors would appear very giant during, I think, a PTB it was. There's this picture of Nia going absolutely huge on Ormond. It was a very strange bug. I think that is what I'm referring to there actually, is the bug. But also, I do think it's interesting to mention the lore size difference and how the entity changes the survivors' sizes. Deleted lore refers to much of the game's lore that gets deleted or just isn't present in the game. I think the most famous example of this is Benedict Baker's lore. He was a character originally who would comment on various things around the campfire, various things survivors did, and various things that the killers did. He would talk about them and theorize on who they were and how they interacted with others and things like that. But these were all removed after the release of Kate and the Clown. Benedict too also just disappeared. And this seemed to be because he was sort of this early version of the Observer, because Benedict disappeared and then I think it was around a year or so later, the Observer appeared. So it's this sort of trade-off, it seems. But basically, for the deleted lore, the Benedict lore is no longer present in the game. You can only find it on the store pages like Steam Store, or you can find it on things like the wiki. Other deleted lore is lore from some events. Some events do get specific lore for them through an unlockable tome. At least they used to get them through tomes. However, when the tome went away or the event ended, the lore was no longer accessible. Even if you had completed it all and you had unlocked it all, it was simply no longer available or accessible in-game. The only way you could see it was on the wiki or in a way that some person had recorded it, which seems like a big shame, doesn't it, to just delete the lore, especially when someone probably worked quite hard on it. But I suppose also having this momentary peek into it is sort of interesting too. Medkit ID changes. There's a very strange piece of flavor text on one of the medkits. It's the purple medkit, and there's this ID tag on it. It says VKID, and then I think a bunch of numbers. And there's been lots of theories for what this is. I have a bit of a theory that it's Vigo's medkit. He's called, Vigo something, Vigo K, or something like that. But this has never been confirmed, or it's never really been explained what this is or what this could possibly be referring to. And what's interesting is that across different languages in the game, the ID of this medkit changes, which seems like such a small or sort of minute detail, yet it does change across these different languages. I think there's 3 different versions I could find through switching through languages. It's very bizarre. Closable exit gates refers to the fact that at one point there were plans to make exit gates not only openable, but also closable again as well. So you could open up the gate and then you could close it behind you, or the killer could even close it behind a survivor, and therefore other survivors would have to reopen the gate in order to get out. It was to sort of have this more interaction around the endgame and the gates themselves. This doesn't seem like a terrible idea, honestly, does it? For some characters at least. I think it could be quite fun, depending on how long it took to close the gate. There would maybe need to be a slightly longer action involved in that. Spirit counterplay. I think this is simply referring to the fact that for a very long time, Spirit didn't really have any counterplay, and it became sort of this meme that Spirit's counterplay existed at all, and people were sort of saying, oh, there's this counterplay, but it never was anything substantial, or it was so niche and specific that it was just impossible to pull off. So I think that's all it is for a long time, Spirit didn't really have any counterplay, but many people tried to claim she had lots, or like there was plenty to counter her, when in reality there was really very little. Maurice is psychic. If you didn't know, in the lore of, in sort of the deep lore, I suppose, Maurice actually has multiple tome entries, and they're titled Maurice the Magnificent, and they focus on the story of Maurice and how he sort of got passed through lots of different owners, his rough life leading up to his time in the realm, and coming under the sort of care of the clown, and later Saku, who he becomes very good friends with after she saves him from this big, strange tentacle monster. And this is basically it. He's also psychic. He's able, even in his early lore before the realm, and before he gets his third eye from being burned, he's able to actually infiltrate people's minds and speak to them, which is quite strange, but he's able to do that. It's in line with DBD's lore, I suppose. It's not like it's too strange, I guess. And in the realm, I suppose this is why he got a third eye too, is because the third eye is often about being in tune with sort of your, I don't know, like with psychic powers, or like, it's like the third eye. It's like seeing something others don't. So I think that's also why he got a third eye. I think it's quite an interesting progression for a character like Maurice, being a horse. Firecracker add-ons refers to the fact that at one point it was planned to have add-ons for the firecrackers, and these would be pretty standard add-ons. There'd be things like giving the firecracker 2 charges, or having a longer fuse for the firecracker so you could time a save a bit more, a bit ahead of time, for example. There's also ones that make a bigger explosion when the firecracker is dropped and stuff like that. So I think it would have been quite interesting. I think this just wasn't made, however, because firecrackers ended up being primarily a sort of an event item, and therefore having items only tied to an event item would maybe be a bit too much, a bit too restrictive, and so they decided to just put firecrackers as event items. Maybe if they add these later on as sort of a fully fledged item, this would be possible as a thing. However, it does seem fairly unlikely, considering we have flashbangs now as a perk too. It feels like this probably won't happen. The Stamper's work for the entity refers to the fact that both Otto Stamper and Pauline Stamper seem to cause people to come into the realm. Otto Stamper was the mentor of Doctor and the founder or creator of the Garden of Joy, which caused the Dredge to arrive or summon there after he caused this huge massacre. And the same thing for Doctor. He gave him free reign over Larry's, and it caused Doctor to eventually end up in the realm. In the same way, Pauline actually hired Nicolas Cage to recreate the way Blight was taken in his lore, and this resulted in Nicholas also being taken into the realm. So in both cases, it seems these Stampers cause people to go into the realm to some degree. They're these sort of vessels for getting other people into the trials, which is quite interesting. And it makes you think, if this is happening, surely it means these Stampers must be working for the entity in some way. It seems pretty plausible, I think. Sewer map. I believe the sewer map is an unused map for the backwater swamp. There's a variation of it that was never used, and it has this sort of sewer tunnel coming out of one of the walls or one of the sort of mounds of a swamp. And that's about it, I think. It's just this unused map. There's sort of also other structures on the map too, I think. But yeah, it looks pretty cool. I think you can also find that one on the DBD Leaks YouTube. They've done lots of sort of walkthroughs or runarounds of these unused maps and realms, which are quite interesting. This one does have a bit more texture too, so it was possibly a bit closer to being finished and would have maybe come to fruition, but it was decided not to be added. There's also a really cool tree in one of these. I know that sounds very strange, but there's this tree where you can sort of run through the bottom of the roots it's a very cool design. I do wish they'd add that to the game in some way, even if they don't add the whole map, but just add the tree. Like with Shelter Woods, that could work well, I think. If you could run through the base of the huge Shelter Woods tree in some way, I think that'd be super cool. 4 teachable perks. I think this simply refers to the fact that originally the developers planned to give every character 4 teachable perks, and I think that's basically all that is. It's the fact that originally, instead of 3 teachable perks, there were plans for characters to all have 4. So yeah, that I think that's about that. Ace's scar refers to a scar Ace has on, I think it's like his abdomen, and this is supposedly a scar he got from either him selling his own kidney, is the theory, or his kidney being stolen and sold on due to his debt he has from his gambling. I think both theories are pretty plausible. Are pretty plausible for Ace, considering who he is. So yeah, that's pretty much that. There's a small scar Ace has on sort of his, it's like his abdomen area, which is theorized to be a sort of a kidney, or I don't know, some kind of organ he sold or has been sold for him to pay for his debt, which is pretty brutal, but in line with Ace, I think. Michaela knows Pyramid Head. This is a very small, not really theory, it's actually just a direct connection. And this is that Michaela knows who Pyramid Head is because I think she has a poster in her room in one of the trailers for her, and it simply shows Pyramid Head. So that's like the whole connection, is that Michaela actually knows Pyramid Head, which is quite cool. Ghostface has asthma is quite an interesting theory, and this comes down to an unused add-on that Ghostface has, and it's actually an inhaler. And this inhaler doesn't seem to refer to any other victim, or doesn't reference anyone else in his lore. So people think that this belonged to Ghostface himself, and Ghostface actually has asthma, which is also why he potentially pants so heavily as well when he gets stunned by a pallet. So it's this sort of a very like small theory, but I do like it a lot. I think it's nice when you have these ones that sort of add a layer of, I don't know, character, or add another detail about the character. So I do really like this one, even if it's just this small connection. Meet Your Maker is a DBD sequel. If you didn't know, Meet Your Maker is a game that Behavior also released, and it's sort of this post-apocalyptic game where there's nothing left really, and it's this sort of dead world. And the theory goes that basically Meet Your Maker is a sequel to DBD, or a sequel to a world destroyed by the entity, and what's left of it is what we see in Meet Your Maker. So the horrors that occurred in the Meet Your Maker world were caused by the entity and one of its perfect apocalypses that it forms. And so, yeah, the aftermath of what we see in Meet Your Maker is the aftermath of what a world looks like after the entity is done with it. Which I think is, I don't know, I like that. The Legacy Skull is something I was on a bit of a quest for fairly recently. And this refers to a strange, I think, bug it must have been, where there was a skull appearing on the Grim Pantry map of Backwater Swamp. And it had this legacy texture. It's sort of the same texture that legacy clothing items have for the original characters if you earned them back in the day, which is a texture that realistically shouldn't be appearing anywhere else aside those clothes. So it's really bizarre why these were appearing on this skull. But basically this was one I remember seeing running around Grim Pantry and seeing this strange sort of legacy skull. and just wondering, why is that? And then someone luckily reached out to me over email and did actually send me a picture of the skull and confirmed it was real, which was very relieving for me and my sanity. um, but yeah, that's about that. It was probably just a bug. It's just this cool thing that I feel like not many people know about, but there were a few people who did remember along with me, and that made me very happy. Hamlet and Dmitri are two names given to various animal, sort of, well, I don't know, animal objects scattered around the realm. um, Hamlet refers to the pig you can find, the unicycle pig you can find on the top of Coldwind Farm's exit gates. The devs have called this pig Hamlet, and then Dimitri refers to the meat tree, or which people often call it, or cow tree, on the Coldwind map also. So Hamlet and Dimitri both on this map. I believe this was for an Earth Day a few years ago. They did this too. They officially gave lots of things name tags, which was quite funny. Spirit was going to have no clothes is basically what it sounds like. Spirit at one point was going to have no clothes, but they decided against it because it probably wouldn't be accepted, or they wouldn't be able to publish the game in certain countries if she was completely naked. So yeah, that's all that is. So they covered her up. Maurice is an elder god. I think this refers to this might actually be one of my theories, in fact, where Maurice is basically planning to take over the realm with his psychic powers. That's the simple version of it. I don't remember all the details. There's a whole video I made on that one, but essentially it's just that Maurice has this master plan, and he planned to get taken by Dredge all along, and it's all part of the plan. With him now currently with Saku, he's, making his way to eventually overthrowing the entity and becoming a sort of omnipotent in some way. The Unknowns refers to various characters who know a lot about the realm, and these characters exist inside of the realm too. They're characters who roam around the realm and seem to know about lots of its parts. However, we never really see most of them. Many of these people also seem to become very inhuman throughout their time in the trials. However, it does seem like many of the unknowns mentioned also cross over quite closely to characters such as Vigo, Benedict, Trix, the Mad Designer, and characters like that. So potentially they're also considered unknowns. But basically, they're these characters who know a lot about the realm, and they sort of wander the fog. And there are a few characters as well that Saku seems to come across. But they're basically people who can use the fog, and they can traverse the fog without issue. Which, again, is a quality that Vigo had. He could actually form things from the fog just by willing them into existence. Which is why he was able to escape, seemingly, is by sort of honing his abilities in this way. A bit like the Observer has slowly been able to do since he lost the Aurus. Everything is a trial simply refers to the fact that everything in the realm, not just in the trials in-game, but also everything more broadly, is all a trial, all for the purpose of providing the entity with emotion. So even things happening in the void is a trial. Even things happening with the Observer in his tower, that was all a trial just to feed the entity. All of Saku's journey has all just been a trial. It's something that most of the characters who do enter the realm and understand the entity's motivations do think about, and it does cross their mind that, hey, maybe I'm just being used this whole time, and everything is a trial. It's this sort of theory that, everything comes back to this, or comes down to this, that ultimately everything that's happening is all just for the purpose of feeding the entity. Cliff's fate refers to a lore character named Cliff Barra, and this is a character who goes to save his partner Alex, or Alex Damaro, after he finds himself in the realm. And Cliff goes after him, and he replaces Alex and saves Alex, and Alex escapes through, I think, a hatch, and he seems to end up potentially as a survivor, where Cliff ends up as a killer. But Cliff goes through some very horrible things to become a killer. He gets strapped to this table, he gets repeatedly struck with lightning, and he gets surrounded by these many creatures because he's sort of this horror director. He gets surrounded by many of these horrific creatures he put in his films over the years, and they're all encased in formaldehyde. And this seems to be the process for how killers are made, sort of in the realm, or how killers are made to obey the entity and everything it does. So it's sort of this very brutal insight into the reality behind the entity and what it does. So yeah, that's that. Bob refers to, I think this actually refers to the rumored original version of Myers, before Myers was actually added to the trials and the realm. It was also a name given to Wraith as sort of a name in the files, I think, was Bob. But I think it was also this unused character, and seemingly a character that appeared in a few pieces of artwork in the art book as well, that was released very early on into the game. And it's essentially a sort of original version of Myers, seemingly, which is quite interesting. But yeah, they were called Bob, so that's that. The car exit also refers to the fact that, again, I think this was in the art book, or in something like that, it makes reference to the fact that there was plans at some point to make one of the exits to get out of the trials be a car, and repairing a car or fueling a car in some way, and then escaping in the car. So that's about it. This sort of ended up happening to some degree, I suppose, because you're powering a generator. Maybe at some point the generator would have been in a car and you would be repairing it or something, I don't know. This is probably very early days though, and probably didn't get that far into development. Spectral Rarity is an unused rarity, seemingly. It's sort of this pale blue tealy colour, and it's another rarity in the game files that's never been used, but it's named Spectral Rarity, and it's very mysterious. The other entities refers to the fact that there were other entities, or there are directly referenced other entities, named the Ancients. And these seem to coexist peacefully on the Observer's homeworld of Terra Primus. The Observer recounts that the Ancients used to swim through the night sky, and it seems to be this very peaceful interaction. So whoever these other entities were, they didn't seem to be like our entity, this sort of malevolent, evil force that wants to create these trials to feed and grow. They were seemingly just these ancient, potentially like cloud-like formations or beings that would float through the night sky, and the observers' people would watch and sort of admire, seemingly. It also begs the question of what happened to them, though. Presumably the entity probably killed them all, as the entity does, or it consumed them all, or something like that. Especially because there is sort of some reference made in the Observer's many Arcus entries that his homeworld and the people there were all destroyed by the entity, because some of them sort of appear to him in the realm, which sort of suggests that the entity has absorbed them. Therefore, it's quite likely it also got all of the other ancients too, which is quite a scary concept, because it means there really probably is nothing in power to face up to the entity, as it's quite literally also consumed all of the other entities, all of the other beings that would be considered the same as the entity. The entity's language can be translated. This one is actually truly a deep theory nowadays, because the devs have directly stated now that the entity's language doesn't have a specific translation, because it is meant to be ever-changing, and the entity is too mysterious to ever understand, which I think is fair enough. However, at one point they did tell us that it was translatable, even though it just seems a bit like I don't know, just a bit nothingy. It just looks like a mess of different letters. But there are apparently some passages or entries that do mean something. So there's still hope out there that the entity's language can be translated to some degree, at least portions of it. Romulus. This simply refers to the fact that Romulus of Rome, one of Rome's founders, is actually in the realm and is written about by Michaela, partaking in some trials with Yui and some lighthouse keepers. I just thought I'd put this down here because I think there's probably very few people who know that Romulus of Rome is actually tied to DPD's lore and realm. So I thought I'd put that in the deep part because I think that's quite funny. Lotus Bones is this mysterious phrase that appears in the DPD art book. There's this section titled Lotus Bones, and it doesn't really elaborate on what Lotus Bones is, or what Lotus Bones as a phrase even means. If you search up the phrase Lotus Bones, it doesn't bring up anything because it's not really anything. So it's this very confusing thing about what Lotus Bones is. My assumption is that it was probably meant to be an early name for totems, because obviously bones, I don't know, lotus bones, maybe it's something to do with it being sort of a charm, I don't know. But my assumption is it was some sort of early thing for the tomes. Maybe they looked a bit different. The totems, sorry, not tomes. And maybe they looked a bit different, but they were, functionally the same idea behind them. It could also have been some sort of abandoned mechanic, maybe something to do with XP instead of blood points, something like that. It's really a bit pointless speculating, but it's this phrase that appears, and it seems to be for a concept or an idea, yet it's never really expanded upon, so I've always found this one very interesting. The Crueler. This is a character who seemed to be in development, but never came to fruition in any way. And it seems to be a character sort of based on the Hag, and it seems to be a character that was meant to originally be in the Backwater Swamp, but ended up not being, with it eventually going to the Hag. So it's this strange character that appears, I think, in one piece of sort of concept art that fits the swamp realm, and seems to have reference made, but it never actually appears in the game or anything sort of beyond this, which is really interesting. The final one today is Gabriel slept with a planet, and I think this just refers to a cosmetic, which sort of makes reference to, or like, I don't know, it's very, very vague referencing to the fact, it's this wild theory that Gabriel managed to sleep with a planet in some fashion, potentially even Devaka itself. So yeah, there you go. And there we go. That's the bottom of the iceberg. I will say this has been a bit of a wild ride, but there we have it. That's the entire iceberg. Yeah, that's it. I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you have anything you think deserves to be added. And I do hope you've enjoyed listening along to this one. Potentially, at some point, I'll try and make this into a sort of a main channel video. And I'll try and pair a few of these up with images and things like that. I think there's probably a few things I could add, and I could talk about in a bit more depth. There's a few things I definitely want to add even now, but I am pretty happy with how sort of robust the list is, because when I made this, I really wanted it to be a fully fleshed out iceberg. I wanted to try and include just about everything I could possibly talk about. And I really wanted to make sure that the tiers as well, or the levels, were very sort of distinct for the, or related well to the amount of people who knew about them. And I feel like I've done a pretty good job at that. Like looking from the top to the bottom, the amount of people who are going to know the phrase lotus bones, or know about the cruller, or know about, I don't know, the car exit or spectral rarity or any of these things, I think is very, very few. Even people who have like thousands of hours in the game, there's a very good chance they don't know about these things. Whereas at the top, it's mostly sort of basic memes, it's things you find out pretty quickly, I think. It's all stuff, you become acquainted with, I think, pretty early on into playing the game and sort of engaging with the community. So yeah, I am quite happy, I think, with how this has turned out. But of course, I would always like to improve it, and I'm sort of happy to improve it at any time. I do want it to keep improving and hopefully changing and developing. And then potentially I can adjust it as well and make like a full breakdown on the main channel with images as well. I just thought for now it'd be nice as sort of a sleep video, a calming video just to listen to. It's also a bit easier for me rather than undertaking this huge sort of 3-hour editing project. It means I can sort of just sit back and chill and yap about the various details and sort of lore things or gameplay things that have happened over the years, which is also just quite enjoyable for me because I like doing that too. But yeah, I do think there's I think I'm quite happy with how it's turned out so far. There may be a few things by the time this video does come out which might be slightly outdated or might have changed as I've gone through the months even of recording this, because I think I've recorded this across about 5 months now. Things already have changed. A few things that I've mentioned have been altered and have changed, such as the entity's language being translatable. Was confirmed recently as not possible or as sort of false by the devs, which was something that was open-ended before. So it's this sort of situation where, it's sort of the situation where it's we don't know what could change, and there's various things in this video that may now be confirmed false or confirmed no longer possible. But yeah, I think for the most part, everything should be up to date. And everything I've talked about today should be up to date with whenever the video ends up releasing. So yeah, that's that. And further to that, there are probably things worthwhile adding to this iceberg that haven't been mentioned in this video as well. Things that have popped up over the last few months as well and could very well fit into the iceberg in some capacity. So yeah, once again, thank you so much for watching, whether you've listened along whilst falling asleep, whether you've listened along whilst awake and sort of more actively listening, whether you've watched the video, even if it's just, I know it's just gameplay in the background, but I mean, it's mainly meant for listening, I think, these videos, but if you've watched along too, thank you also, I appreciate that greatly. No matter the case, I do hope you've enjoyed, and I'm glad people seem to like these videos and appreciate them, and I'm glad it does seem to help people actually fall asleep. That's really good to hear, and I'm glad the channel is managing to sort of fulfill its intended purpose. So yeah, thank you so much for watching or for listening. Thanks and good night.